I'm going to set that recording. Right, so hello, welcome to this interview. You're about the, I think you're about the maybe the 14th or the 15th person now to do this. I've lost kind of track.
Nice.
I'm just doing it basically, and I've got a few more
Very
still to
good.
do. And it's all been very interesting. Obviously, there's a real range of people that are
Mm.
coming at this from all sorts of angles. So, everyone from kind of you guys in Copenhagen are obviously people like Patrick who are from a computer background,
Hmm.
people like yourself from more of a theatre background, people
Hmm.
like Tom Rizzotti from New York who just makes new sports for a living.
Hmm.
So there's all sorts of, there's people kind of, say like Jana who works with us, who's more from a
Hmm.
geography and urban kind of landscape type of, environment or setting for the work. So
Hmm.
it's a real range, basically, which is kind of useful in some respects because I'm getting like obviously lots of diverse opinions about some of the things I'm going to ask people about. But also as well, there's bits of conflict. I wonder as well. Maybe when I look back
Oh,
at this,
good.
I might see that
Good.
there's some interesting debates maybe to be had at some point.
Yeah.
But the whole point of this interview is for me to not really say anything else after I finish speaking now, really, apart from the questions,
Okay.
which is quite difficult for
Cool.
me, as you might be able to imagine. But really, it is about, it's just about how you interpret these questions I'm asking you from your kind of context.
Hmm.
And I just really, really want to hear everything you have to say about these things, really.
Okay.
Simple as that, really. So, I guess the first place to
Yay.
start is just an introduction. So, what I've been
Hmm.
asking people to do is just to introduce themselves, tell us who you are, where you're
Hmm.
from, what you do, and why do you do it. So, however you
Okay.
interpret that in terms of what you do, and I mean, the only thing I'd say about that is obviously, this is about the game kind of thing, isn't it? But you
Mm.
interpret it as you will. So who are you? Who is Philip?
Right. So I guess my name is Philipp Ehmann, and I am from Vienna, Austria. Who am I? Not an easy question, actually. As easy as it sounds. I am a transdisciplinary artist, I would say. I have a theatre background. I studied theatre in England, in Exeter, and started off as a theatre director, and then slowly became involved in pervasive gaming, if you want to call it that, or the wide range of public gaming, or non-traditional, not video gaming that might be. Um, and I would say I now work uh, as a theater director, as a game designer, as an experience designer, is maybe probably the best word. Even though I have to say I don't like the word design or designer quite that much, because for me it involves the connotation of a product being designed, and I actually don't design products. I compose experiences, if you if you wanna call it that, or I try to direct experiences, maybe, or make experiences happen. So yeah, I mostly do work in public places, and they mostly involve a narrative element and some kind of gaming structure. So I started off with using theater and using gaming mechanics or game mechanics in theater, in public places, and to involve the audience. Mm, yeah, I think
Great.
that's probably a
Great.
definition.
That's a really great description, and I love that idea of an experienced composer. I think that's a really nice idea.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's yeah.
So why games then, Philip? Why So it's quite a similar
Mhm.
story to, I guess, myself and other people in the Larks, and I guess people like Coney as well might have a similar
Mhm.
um, you know journey into this in some ways from that kind of theatre background. But what is it for you that kind of well, why games? Why bother
Mhm.
with games? Isn't
Mhm.
theatre okay as it is? or do we need to be
No.
bothered? But tell me, why games for you?
Several reasons, I think. For one, I was looking for an ethical way of interacting with audience members. And I thought that in traditional theatre, you have the setting of usually the theatre space, which is actually very, very, except for maybe studio spaces, but is usually the audience is very removed from actors or performers. And I think there's nothing more unethical than a performer coming from stage into the auditorium, which is actually physically separated, architecturally separated, with a microphone and maybe a spotlight, and asking someone something who is totally unprepared. So I came in contact with pervasive games, and thought, actually, if you set it up as a game, and people know the rules beforehand, and they kind of know what to expect, or sort of have slightly different expectations than if they were in a normal theatre or very traditional theatre setting. Um, and yeah, so that's one reason why gaming, because I believe it's a more ethical way to interact. But also then gaming, I think everyone can play, and in games everyone is equal, or it has to abide to the same set of rules. So that's a very interesting concept for me, as a politically active artist. Is a set, or a setting where people actually are the same, and people who are 65 like to play, and 5-year-olds like to play. There's almost no difference. There might be a difference in terms of what they can play physically, because maybe you can't run around anymore, but you still like chess, or I don't know. But everyone plays. Animals play. It's sort of a unique, universal language that you can use, or that's out there. So I think that's why bother playing. It's something universal that connects us all, and that makes us all somehow equal in some sort of way.
That's really fascinating, and of course that kind of ties quite nicely into things like the Heightsinger thing, isn't it? The homo
Absolutely,
movement and all that
absolutely.
kind of stuff. So great, great. Okay, so let's talk a bit about the audience for your work that you make. So I'm obviously talking about the game work here. So your street game, is it Street Game Conspiracy, isn't it? Your collective,
Yeah, exactly.
Is that? Can you just tell me a bit about them? Actually, the Street Game Conspiracy. Who else is in that? In fact, tell me that first, and then I'll ask about the audience, because I'm just
Yeah.
a bit curious to know about.
So actually, there's two things. The Street Game Conspiracy is a collective of artists, mostly from Vienna, who sort of wanted to make street games, and we found each other basically looking for other people who make that kind of work in Austria, which is really difficult because there's hardly anyone. And then there is Play Vienna, the festival. We curate as the Street Game Conspiracy. The two are basically the same people, but really theoretically are separate, because the one is a collective and the other is an organization just curating a festival. So yeah, we, the Street Game Conspiracy, are just a number of people from all kinds of different backgrounds, from multimedia artists to journalists to hackers. There's a big hacker scene in Vienna, computer hacker, and to performers, theater directors like myself. Yes, cool. and we all come together to make a specific kind of work, which is street games.
Fascinating. So many things I'd like to converse with you about these things, but I've got to be disciplined and focus on. So these are things. These are things we can talk about.
Predetermined question.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's just that we could be here all week talking about.
I know.
So I want to hear about the audience, Philip. So could you describe your audience? Who are they? why do they come to this particular type of work? And then there's a kind of second part to this question which is about how do we sustain and develop this audience for this type of work. So maybe you just tackle the first bit first. Who comes to see the games that you make? And why do they come?
We started off with people literally our age, meaning definitely below 40, probably above 16. So it's a very young audience, I guess. I'm guessing we started off with about between 20 and 30 age group of between 20 and 30-year-olds, young people who were interested in something new, I guess. We've expanded to all sorts of people, including pensioners and children. Obviously, children are probably the most likely to be interested in playing in public spaces because they do all the time anyway. But really, I think what I would like the audience to be is everyone possible. So this is possible, but I would like anyone to be the audience and everyone. But I think who really are the audiences is quite a small range of people, unfortunately. I think street games can be for everyone. I just don't think that most people, at least in Austria, have caught on to to what this is, even though it's not really a new thing if you look at it closely. I mean, as kids, we've all played outside in the street. The games might have been different. The contexts might have been different, but and the complexity might have been different, but still really the basics are still the same thing. So I think the potential audience is everyone, and unfortunately the current audience is between 20 and 40-year-olds.
And so what do you think? Have you got any thoughts or ideas on how we develop that audience for this work?
Yeah. I think it's really difficult. I think by tackling, designing, I don't like the word design, but making games that target specific groups of people, we can sort of get them interested in that type of work by playing in places that are accessible to almost everyone, or that have a very wide range of people who actually cross that space or have access to that space. So the more public you play, the better. If you play in a courtyard, it might be nice to play in a courtyard, but maybe the access for the general public is not that wide. If you, however, play in a massive public space with lots of people crossing it, then you have a wider access. If you play in outside or inside an old people's home, then you might be building an audience there, or gamers there, players there. So I think it really comes down to what kind of work we make and for what type of audience, and to really, while thinking about what mechanics we use, to really think also of the group of people we want to use them with, or we want to encourage to play that game. If I'm making a game that is solely based on running around and tagging people, old people might not be interested, as well as handicapped people might be interested. So yeah, even though I have to say that even, especially with Play Vienna or all urban game festivals I've been to, you have the feeling that even if people don't play, they love to watch. It immediately draws a crowd. Oh, what's going on? Oh, this is new. This seems new. Oh, it's just a couple of people playing. Oh, can I play? Or even if I don't want to play, I'm still happy watching, and it's still sort of a spectacle that's interesting and engaging somehow, even if I just watch.
Interesting, really interesting. Okay. Well, there's so many things I'd love to talk to you about, but we need to do this over another time because I can't. I'll just lose the interview otherwise.
Go
So,
for a pound.
yes, definitely. Yeah, yeah. Right. Okay. So here's a question that I've been asking everyone, and again, you're getting a real range of answers to this. And feel free to just say that this is just something I don't think about as well. You know, that's fine as well. Um, I'm really interested in finding out whether the artists and the designers, or whoever we might describe ourselves, I'm really interested to find out if you ever use computer game design models or content or themes or influences from kind of video game culture or computer game culture. Do you ever use anything from that world when realizing a game in a live setting? And if you do, how do you go about doing that? If you do that, right? Or if you don't do that, what are your thoughts on doing that? Is there any merit or value in doing that, in your opinion? Or
Absolutely, I think there is, and I think we all at least sometimes do it. Take bits and pieces that we find, or game mechanics that we find that might work in a different setting. I think obviously the easiest way to, especially for me coming from a theater background, the easiest way of making a game in a public space is taking some sort of treasure hunt aspect that you might find in a digital game as well. Sort of making the players the heroes, and they have to find different objects and converse with different people is, I think, a structure that's prevalent in video games, definitely, and can also be prevalent. Well, it's not prevalent, but exists in speed games as well. And generally, I think a good way to start taking a game mechanics that you find really interesting and just playing with it. And if that's from a digital game or a board game even, or some kind of other game, just playing with it and seeing how can I transport this or transform this and make it happen or work in an actual physical space or outside in a public space with live players. I think the problem with a sort of video game environment versus a public street game environment is obviously that video game environments are 100% controlled. Even with sandbox games, it's all, even Minecraft is controlled. You know, there's some things you just can't do, and some things you really can do and can explore. But in real life, there just might be a car coming from the left that you didn't anticipate, or it might start to rain, or I don't know. There's just things you can't control, and I think the difficulty in a public setting is that to learn how to structure or change those game mechanics into a way that they allow for openness, for the openness of the public setting, as well as give enough structure so that you can play a game and that it's fun and that you have certain rules that actually make the game work. You know, I think that's the difficulty and the fun in making those games.
And this is a common thing I sort of hear, I think, this thing about rigidity and flexibility, isn't it? You know, somehow sort of strong enough structure to support the game, but then flexible enough to be playful, I guess, isn't it, really?
Exactly, absolutely.
I mean, you kind of started to go into the next question there, really, as well, which is, you know, the question of what are the challenges, but also what are the opportunities of making games in live settings. I'm saying live settings because I'm not specifically looking at public settings, and that's because I think the work I'm doing with the Larks at the minute, we're actually going back into a theatre space, and so which we haven't done for a while. So, you know, for my research, I'm going to be talking about public spaces, absolutely, but I'm more interested in the live space, you know, the liveness, basically. And I'm curious as to just find out from people like yourself, what in your experience of playing with this, what have been the key challenges of, you know, of making games in live moments, and then what are the opportunities for that as well?
I think both a challenge as well as an opportunity is the way the players react to the setting you give them. I think there is enormous potential and creativity in everyone in the world, and every audience member and every player. And I think in a live setting, you can actually, use that. But at the same time, the challenge is, how do you make the setting, as we just said, how do you give them the opportunity to be creative, still have fun, still not overstep certain boundaries that you maybe shouldn't overstep. Extreme example, if I need to kill someone, I wouldn't really kill them, obviously. Obviously, that's not going to happen, but how do you give them the boundaries that they need to or that the game needs to function as a game, as an experience? So I think, the boundaries and core mechanics are really the most difficult part of a live setting, and the unpredictability of the interaction of the audience and of the interaction. But at the same time, as I said, I find it incredibly fascinating what can happen in that setting. And liveness is the reason I started theatre. And I have the feeling I've just become more extreme with it. So, in a performance, it's live, obviously, but still fairly controlled and directed. But the more interactive you get with the audience who haven't had the rehearsal time that the performers had, the more unpredictable it gets, but the more live it gets. I think the more true to life it gets if we're sort of doing that. So yeah, I think that's really, there's so much potential in there.
Great.
Also for people themselves, I think, as in me as a player, there's a lot of potential to just learn about connections between people. There's potential to find stuff out about myself and other people, to play with ideas that I couldn't play in a different setting, within a different setting. For example, I don't know, in a game I might be allowed to be a dictator. Great, can try that out. Not going to happen in real life, hopefully. So it's also gaming is a very social thing, I think, and if you with digital games, there's still a medium that removes you from the social aspect. There is a massive social aspect in digital gaming, absolutely, but with live games, it's a real social aspect. I see the person I'm talking to in front of me. I can touch them. I think as humans, there's something sort of haptic, something kinesthetic about this interaction with an actual person in the real world that's so different from a digitalized mediatized version of the interaction. That also has potential and is very interesting, but I think the live one is even more interesting and social and carries with it some social aspects that it's almost like you are allowed to try things out in a social setting.
Great.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, I've got a kind of two questions here which kind of tie into each other, which I'm only asking the theatre practitioners.
Okay.
Because obviously that's what I'm looking at here, and and if you ask Patrick this and other people this, they just kind of would go, "What are you talking about?" So the question is this. It's quite academic though, so I apologise for this now. How, in your view, how is performance methodology impacted by translating game design mechanics into live performance? So if we've got a box of tools as theatre makers already, what happens to that box when we put game design in there, in your view?
Yeah, it expands massively. I think, as I said at the beginning, I was looking, as a director, I was looking for a way of interacting with my audience on an ethical level. And I think, for example, the game mechanics as tools have given me a way of interacting on a more ethical level than I could maybe before. So I think the tool sets as theatre makers just expands. For my actors, I feel that their improvisational skills expand massively on that because of the unpredictability of the interaction and the way they have to learn their characters. So in terms of methodology, you start actually approaching. You start with new level ways of approaching rehearsals. You start with new ways of approaching and new mechanics and techniques of approaching acting, of approaching the medium. So I think it can only be good, surely.
Can I?
So yeah, I think yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. I just want to. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point you've made there. But I'm curious as well. What do you feel the functional synergies and differences kind of are between games and performance?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it sort of strikes me that there's some things that are very similar and some that are very different. But I'm curious to hear what your opinion is on that. Do these worlds kind of go together well, or is there times when it's actually there's a conflict of interest, maybe, or I don't know.
Oh, I think yeah. Mm-hmm. Very good question. Yes, I think there are conflicts. I think they work together actually fairly well because as a theatre maker, I'm designing a world on stage, whereas as a game designer, I'm designing a world probably not on stage. As a theatre maker, however, I'm designing a very closed world in terms of audience performer relationships. Yes, of course, it's live. Yes, even with some theatre, it's very close to the audience. If we take Punch Drunk, for example, I would consider them very much theatre, even though it's interactive. It's a different experience than from more traditional theatre that we might be used to. Whereas with mechanics, or as a game designer, I design a world. I design interaction. Actually, I design a world with the possibility of interaction. Whereas as a theatre maker, I think I design a world with the possibility of reaction, if that makes any sense. So as an audience member, I can throw in traditional theatre, I can throw a rotten tomato on stage because I didn't like the play. I can applaud and laugh, so the performers get feedback. But there's never this. I can never actually really influence stage. Whereas with games, I might be able to. But that's also, for using game mechanics, I might be able to. But then again, the more theatrical it is, the less I can influence that as an audience member. So, if that makes any sense, the more theatrical work I did was mostly based on a sort of treasure hunt style theatre in different places where you get different story elements at different places and then piece them together to a whole thing, and maybe have to find some things as a player. But really it was still fairly controlled, whereas the more street games I make have almost had no control over the environment or the story whatsoever. If we take Weeping Angels, yes, it's played in a park or wherever, but you basically just run around and whatever happens. So the world is created through the rules. That might be the difference. So in a game, the world is created through the rules of playing, whereas in the theatre, the world is created through the narrative that has been pre-made or predisposed. at the beginning. If that makes any
No, that's
sense.
great. That makes total sense, and it helps tell a narrative of what I need to write about. Actually, so thank you for that. That's really useful. Yeah,
Cool.
yeah. I'm going. I seem to be losing connection a little bit with you here, Philip. So what I'm going to do,
Okay.
I've only got 2 more questions to ask, but I'm going to hang up and start again just to see maybe I might get an improved line. Is that okay?
Sure.
I'll ring you
Go
back in
for it.
just a second, mate.